This is group number 5 for ED 302 10515. Our names are Kieran Pruitt, Vernon Woods, and Rebecca Henriksen. Our topic that we chose was special education and inclusion practices. A little bit of history and background of special education. In 1975, the United States Congress passed the Education for All Handicapped Children Act to help meet the needs of students with disabilities. This act was not as detailed as it could have been and needed to be at the time. So the law was updated in 2004. It was renamed at this moment to the Individuals with Disabilities Act, which is more commonly known today as the IDEA or IDEA Act. So since that moment, though, the percentage of students with disabilities that are in general education classrooms has increased. And in the 2022 to 2023 school year, that number was up to 66%. And those students were getting pulled to resource and teachers just for some special education, like some extra help, things like that. But it requires a lot of inclusion in the classroom. Some facts about special education and inclusion that we kind of researched were inclusion as a whole requires differentiation. If a teacher is not differentiating for a student, then they are not including the student and considering their needs and their levels on math, reading, any topic. Accommodations and modifications are something that are very important when it comes to inclusion of special education students. Accommodations are important, but they're also not the same thing. Accommodation kind of changes how the student learns, so you could give them a lesser amount of problems, or you could move their seat to sit beside someone that does know a little bit more, or someone maybe they're closer to the board so they can see whatever they need. Whereas modifications kind of change what the student learns. So if they're not to the level of everybody else in the classroom, it's kind of just a little bit lighter load. It's a lower level just to get them the proper education they do deserve. Another important thing about special education is paraprofessionals. I know a lot of people hear the word paraprofessional and they think only in or in special education, like contained classrooms. And while they are there, they also are in with resource special education teachers and do a lot of pushing into general education classrooms to help those students. And that helps with their inclusion and differentiation. Just sometimes to have a little extra hand to be there to tell them, hey, this show them individually, because one-on-one work is important. And the last thing that we kind of thought was very important was collaboration with families and other teachers. As teachers, our biggest support is each other. If I don't know something, the best option for me is to go find a teacher that does. And odds are somebody else does, or somebody else has a similar question. So as a general education teacher, a good resource for you is a special education teacher, and vice versa. As a special education teacher, you want to know how that student's doing in a general education classroom. So the gen ed teacher is a good resource for you. But collaboration with families is important when we're trying to get behaviors or understand what's going on at home that's making maybe a behavior look a little different at school, because home life does have a lot to do with school behaviors and things that go on at school.
Okay, so then we were talking about inclusion practices and the impact of special education and the inclusion practices on teachers. Some of the things we put down were inclusion sets a high expectation for all learners. I mean, that's important just because, when you set the goals for the students, some students are not going to be able to do as much as others. So you have, once they reach the goal, the expectation's just better. Another, improving teacher skills, since you have to learn to accommodate students who need it. And then inclusion benefits teachers because they have to learn new strategies to teach students. Each student learns differently. The next slide, the impact of special education and inclusion practices on students. Some things we put down were studies have shown that the impact of inclusion on school culture benefits both students with and without disabilities. Uh, I mean, with the students without disabilities, they learn to step up and be more of a leader. And I feel like the ones with disabilities kind of look up to them and appreciate them looking out for them. Uh, Another thing we put down is benefits of inclusion include improved teaching skills and teaching strategies, stronger skill development, higher attendance, and fewer behavioral disruptions. And last thing we put down was when we create a place that provides educational opportunities that meet students where they are, they'll be better in these environments. So that's all for that slide.
And for the next slide, we did the laws for special education and inclusion. First one we did was Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, for abbreviation. It guarantees FAPA, which is free appropriate education, public education, and IEPs in the least restrictive environment. The second one was Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. It prohibits disability discriminations, provides 504 plans. Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, extends civil rights protections to all settings, including schools. And then the last one was Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA. It promotes accountability and inclusion in general education. And the next slide was why these laws matter. It's pretty basic. It protects the students' education rights. They need those rights even if they do have a disability. It doesn't mean they're any less deserving. And it also promotes inclusion and equal access to an education that we're all have the right to have. The next slide was ways to improve special education and inclusion. Universal design learning strategies to support all learners is number one thing to do. Arrange your classroom for accessibility and comfort. Establish clear routines and visuals for predictability for students with disabilities. This will really help them have an understanding of what's to come next. Foster a classroom culture that it values differences. Work closely with special education teachers and paraprofessionals, which we mentioned earlier. Teachers, we should participate in IEP meetings and follow all the accommodations that are written out. We need to maintain an open communication with families and use shared data and monitor progress. The next slide goes on to more ways to improve education and inclusion by we work closely with special education teachers and paraprofessionals, participate in hold on, I'm repeating, I'm sorry. We just need to continue to work on that and just grow in our inclusion, working hard to include everyone, whether they have, autism or a disability that you can't visibly see. We need to make sure that we include aids, such as, I can't remember exactly what they're called, like the digital recording assistive aids for them. And I think that's all.
And then this slide is just a list of a few resources that we use for all of the different things that we had to research. And then we just went ahead and put them in APA format here. How do I?